Enjoy your night.
You as well. Good night.
Night.
All right, folks, let's call a meeting to order at 6:02. I don't know if you noticed or not, but I did push a lot of information over to you this afternoon. I'm going to try to avoid doing that, but the week got away from me a little bit and some things came over late today, so I went ahead and pushed them over. I don't see anybody from the public here, so we don't have any public comment that we have to worry about. So next up is just what I'm calling an information update. So on Tuesday, I probably spent 2.5 hours of my life that I'm never going to get back to figure out how this system worked inside town hall as it relates to bylaws. And I got to tell you, I was pretty disappointed at the end of the day. So I spoke to 4 or 5 people in there. And so basically the scenario I posed to them was that XYZ bylaw was passed at town meeting last fall. What happens next? So the town clerk told me that, she sends the document off to the Attorney General's office for approval. And if it gets approved or denied, whatever, it comes back. And I said, okay, great. Who has the master files and who updates them? Her response was, I have no idea. So I said, so what about recent bylaws that have passed, like the sign bylaw, or I think recreational marijuana? Have no idea. I've never done that before. So then she thought maybe Donna Burton would know, but Donna was on a phone call, and I talked to Mary Callinger earlier, and I kept asking everybody the same question: who's got the master documents, and what kind of a format are they in? So I went from there down to Heather Ruziak downstairs and asked the same question. She said, I don't know. That's not something that I do. Do you have the master files? I do not. So about an hour later, Donna Burton called me back, and she in fact had the master Word documents for both of those, and explained to me that back in 2019 or 18, her and the former town administrator started working on trying to do some updates and trying to get that document in a better shape. And she said they were able to make some progress, but then they got to a point and they stopped. And I said, okay, so where are you now? She said, I have no idea. No one's ever looked at it again. So it's a sad state of affairs, to be perfectly honest with you. So I've subsequently spoken to the town administrator, and he confirmed that 2 things. Number one, we have nobody in town hall that has the capacity to manage a document like this or like many other documents that we have. And we also don't have the bandwidth to do the work inside of town hall. Now, neither of those 2 things surprise me, because there's been some other incidences where we've asked for certain things to be done and the work product that we get back is marginal at best. So, I've sent you all over the master Word documents this afternoon. You probably haven't had a chance to look at them, but now we are in possession of the same information that the town hall is in possession of. So the next thing I did from there was, and actually she reached out to me before I reached out to her. Lorraine D'Souza reached out to me, and we had a conversation at some length on Wednesday. And I told her what I was looking to do, or what I thought the board was looking to do. And it was simply this: do we have somebody that we can contract with in some way, shape, or form, in this particular case, her, to actually handle the formatting, the rearranging, the importing of the graphics or anything that we need, the conversion of PDF documents over to Word documents or Adobe Acrobat or whatever it might be. So her and I have gone back and forth on that. Late today, she sent me a proposal, which I've sent over to everyone. And I want to talk, we'll talk about that in a little bit, about some of the other options. And again, I don't know if this is the answer or not the answer, but I wanted to come back to the meeting today with something that we could talk about and see if you think it's viable or not. I've also spoken to the town administrator about putting money in the budget, so that we're not going to have to go begging for money. So we're having I think a budget meeting on Thursday, but what I proposed to him was that under the Board of Selectmen's, column, if you will, in the budget, that we put something in there either for bylaw review or just a general thing, and put a chunk of money in there so that we'll be able to get this work done. And under that scenario, the money would be controlled by the Board of Selectmen, but much as the way we've done economic development would go to the Board of Selectmen and say, we'd like to do this, or we need to pay that. They would take a vote, and then the money would get taken out of the account and paid for. I don't see that as any kind of a problem, because the board's the one that authorized this committee, and they've clearly articulated that we're going to have expenses. So there's no new news there, if you will. So, so that's kind of where, the other thing is, I personally am not 100% confident that we even have all the bylaws that the town of Ashburnham may have passed in the last 2 or 3 years, which is absolutely scary for me.
Yeah, because my understanding is they just sort of, when it happens, it sort of just gets tacked on to the end or put into a file drawer, and and it's not incorporated into the document. The only thing I would ask, Bill, that we sort of add to an outcome that we want from this, and that's that a clear definition of who in town hall owns and manages this document. Going forward, I mean, this is more for the future, and it's for the town administrator to work out, because it seems to me making sure this document is tight and well managed and well accessible needs to be, a priority of the town administrator to make sure it happens.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. Matter of fact, one of the things that I've contemplated, and again, we'll talk about it, is once we get done with what we're going to do, that, again, me personally, I would recommend to the town that we engage Lorraine to do this on an ongoing basis, on some sort of a fee basis, an hourly basis, or something like that. And I compare it to, we outsource animal control. We outsource a lot of things.
Yeah.
Just on an ongoing basis. So why wouldn't this just be another thing that we would outsource? I mean, I've known Lorraine a long time. It's a local business. They do superior work. She clearly has a background from Concom and things like that, and understands bylaws. And so it's, we don't have to get anybody up to speed, if you will, about what we're trying to do. But again, if we get to that point and this committee wants to recommend some sort of an action, I'd recommend we make a permanent spot in the budget for it. And as these things come up, just, town council, they're on some sort of a retainer. And when we have a need for them, we go to them, we get the work done, and they get paid.
Well, the only downside to that, you might need to check the legality of that. And only because the document is owned by the town. It's the responsibility of the town, and the accuracy of it is the town. And if you have an outside contractor in possession of it, words can be manipulated after the fact.
Well, no,
and so you have to have some kind of legality of making sure you'd have to have some kind of checks and balances to make sure that the integrity of the document, when approved and when never is altered. And when you have an employee of the town who's doing it, then the town owns that and owns the responsibility. But if someone else were to do it outside, you could lend yourself to a problem. But I'm not debating you. I'm just sort of saying this is one issue that we would have to be resolved before we recommended that to as a final outcome.
Yeah, I agree with you. When you look at it, it is the town's work product. They would have to maintain ownership of the master files and things like that. It would have to be limited as to who would have access to those documents and what they could do. So maybe it's controlled by the town administrator. Those are very, very important points. We'd have to work those through. I just don't see us getting ourselves in a position where we have somebody that has the capacity to do this. We're going to be staring down the same situation with the town's website. The way it's structured now, it's the person that does it is well-intentioned, but they don't have the skill set to do it. It's not a priority for them. These are really, really important things that have to be well-maintained and well-documented, and we got to do better.
Well, you knew there was a problem. That's why we have a committee, right? Isn't that?
Well, there
part of the
again,
issue? We didn't.
yeah.
We're finding out what it is, how big a problem it is. So.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think you're right, Glenn, is that you knew it was an issue, you just didn't know how big of an issue it was, and
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's all good. When I look at the bylaw review committee, the goals and everything else, one thing, if everything was a perfect world we ran into, we'd have a committee, which we have. There'd be a review of the bylaws, a recommendation, and then and to implement. What we just found out, we're not sure we have all the bylaws, so we have to watch ourselves. So good information in, good information out, whatever. The recommendation, we might want to simplify in order to make the May 1st deadline. That maybe what we're doing is, now that you're not sure if you have all the bylaws, you're talking about hiring Lorraine, and we have 8 weeks to May 1st to go, what do we have here? One thing we might want to do, you went out and you got Acton and a couple other towns, we might want to just, maybe the review is to look at the package that we have in the format that our bylaws are in, the general, and go, yes, we agree, or we should tweak that. And then, again, I'm trying to get an action item for this week so that I think you probably take a vote and go, hey, yeah, we should, well, I guess to bring Lorraine on, what happens? We've got to pay her, so we've got to get that in front of the selectmen to approve that, right? So that's.
Yep.
So
No, there's obviously budget implications. You're in one fiscal year, you're going to cross into another fiscal year, and more than likely you're going to cross into a third fiscal year.
Yeah.
So I'll have to work my way through those things. We've had a budget freeze on for the whole year, so I think the budget's in pretty good shape. So whatever costs we incur in this fiscal year, we're going to be able to incur those costs and cover them. Again, it'll be the Board of Selectmen, the town administrator, to vote to do that and decide where the money's going to come from. But that's that. And then, of course, we just saw fiscal 22 for the first time on Tuesday. So again, we'll have to add a line item in there and put some money in there and figure out where that's going to come from. But to your point, on the agenda tonight, the discussion on the bylaw format, that is our action item for tonight. That's where we're going to spend our time talking about that and seeing, if anybody's had a chance to look at the ones I sent over or look at others, and if we can make a decision, great. If we can and we need to do it again next week, we'll do that. But I just wanted to give you some update about stuff I've been trying to find out, try to establish that baseline of where we are. But I think I've reached out to the people on the supplemental list. I've heard back from 3 of them. I've sent that information over to you. Again, there is nothing earth shattering there, but we've established the lines of communication. I'm also going to reach out to economic development, and I'm going to reach out to the Ag Commission and just let them know, because I think there's some things that they wanted to do. So let them know that here's the committee, we're active, we're seeking their participation. If they've got things that they're aware of or things that they would like to have included in there, just to try to get as many people to the party as possible that could possibly have information that we can do.
I skimmed over Lorraine's proposal. I'm not clear what services she would be providing. She would manage this package during the course of the year. Is that, make sure it's it's formatted correctly, and if bylaws are passed, she would actually follow that and make sure those bylaws are included in the package? Is that the role?
Well, again, this is my own thought on it. So right now, we have, let's, for the sake of discussion, we decide on what our format is going to be for the document.
Yeah,
So if one of the things we want to put in there is we want to combine the two documents and have different sections, we want to put the town charter in there. So if, however we engage Lorraine, we would send her an email and say, okay, Lorraine, here's the format we'd like to use. She sets that up in her system. The first thing we want to do is we want to move the town charter into the new document. So if that's only available in a PDF, then she would take that and convert it, however she would have to convert it into a document, and she would insert that in the new document. And she would be responsible for the alignment, the punctuation, the spelling, and all those types of things. So she's not going to be, again, in my mind, she's not going to make decisions about where things are going to go or where they should go. She may come back to us with a recommendation of, gee, maybe you should think about doing this, but she's going to be the person that actually executes getting the information in the document. Again, that's what I think. Now, as we move forward, and if a bylaw gets changed or gets written, you know, again, I'm getting out of my comfort zone here, but let's assume it's a Word document, because I think that's something that's the way it is now. You know, those documents can come over to us and there can be comment sections, and you can type in your comments and suggestions and things like that. So you got this document going back and forth. And then once we settle on whatever changes we're going to make, she takes that. Because remember, when we go to town meeting, we're going to have to be able to articulate all the changes that we've made in these documents right down to the word, because the change of a word could have a dramatic impact on what the interpretation of the bylaw is. And I know, you know, between Walt and Marshall and maybe even you, Glenn, I don't have a lot of experience with bylaws, but I know, you know, everything has an implication when you make a change on it.
yeah.
I have a suggestion. And in this, I'm thinking out loud, which for me is always a little dangerous. But if you mentioned that, I saw the response we got from Sarah. And Sarah's your new building inspector. She has a big learning curve because she's getting to know our bylaws, and she has to have a firsthand, very clear understanding of the bylaws. I think, what would you say about her being an ex officio member of this committee? And I say that because she's the key enforcement officer for at least the planning board and the zoning board parts of the bylaws. And not only would it be probably professional development for her and be an immersion into what's going on, but she could maybe be a resource for the five of us in the process. Is that too wild of an idea?
I don't have an issue with that. I understand why you're making that recommendation. And you know, if you looked at Rick Metcalf from Board of Health, when he responded, almost was going to say the same thing for Rick,
Yep.
but he doesn't have to be here every week. But it'd be nice that, you know, the town, NIMS responded, Bill, I saw that.
Yeah.
You know, there are some issues out there, which is good. That's the feedback we wanted. I think the lion's share of this, you're correct, well, the building piece, if we really look at, you know, the goal and the purpose of the bylaw, promote health, safety, general welfare, environment, the building department is a big part of that. You know, and for the Board of Health, again, we contract that service, so we can bring him in at any time. So I would agree. I like that. I don't have an issue with that.
I'll give you a key example that just happened today.
Yeah.
You all remember what's his first name? Gardner. Danny Gardner. That whole section up there at 119 and 101. And he bought that property He took advantage of what I consider a loophole in the bylaw, the green district or the green business section of the bylaw that has one clause about you can put residential, allows a residential home to be put on the property, which I think in review of the bylaw was a mistake. It was never intended that way because it doesn't conform to, it's in completely counter to what the opening statement is about the bylaw. Now he's apparently come to Sarah and he's wanting to put on, he divided it into 3 parcels. On one of the parcels, he wants to put, there's one of the parcels is business only. And he apparently, I haven't seen it yet, this is all hearsay and rumor, but he apparently is proposing a building that would be an office with 2 residential places that he's calling a 2-bedroom motel, extended stay motel.
Walter, this is true. I've reviewed the site plan.
Yep. So I'm thinking about this. First off, I'm going to tell you, Marshall, that's just a distortion of what the intent of that property is. And there's in my opinion, it ain't gonna fly. But the point being is Sarah's looking around and saying, this doesn't look like what he says it is. And so
But what do you mean? There's no front door
that's right.
to the office? You got to go through the manager's apartment to get to the office?
That's right. But the point is here's Sarah, brand new employee, here in the middle of this. This is just a prime example of how critical the role of the building inspector is in the enforcement and the and the calling out issues with our bylaws and up front, because I think when she's more seasoned, she would be in a position to say to him before it even goes to Marshall, this ain't gonna fly.
I read some of that documentation today because we got it.
Yeah.
From Roger, and I read some of that. Yeah. And if I read it correctly, that's pretty much what she told him. This isn't what you said it is, and there's not this, there's not that. So, which I thought was great because, again, unofficially, I'm of the same opinion. Didn't this guy do this in Townsend?
Oh, he's apparently has quite a reputation, but I don't know all the details of it, so it would be inappropriate for me to comment on it. But
yeah. So anyway, no, I have no problem with that. I replied back to her email. I didn't copy everybody on that, and I just welcomed her on board. Yeah. And I told her that I was looking forward to sitting down and meeting her and having a conversation. To me, that would be a natural progression, that she would have a level of involvement with us on that. Again, I don't think she needs to come to every meeting or things like that, but
that's why I said maybe an ex officio member that would come to a good number of our meetings, particularly as we're going through all the zoning and the planning bylaws.
I think we can capture some of that, Walt, through the agenda, so that she would see next week's agenda, and maybe it's building issues.
Yeah.
Again, she doesn't have to attend any, but the Zoom meetings allow a lot of people. You called in last week. She could call in and so forth and so on. So,
but I mentioned this to you, Bill, because as a select board member, you might want to talk to Brian before we sort of ask her for that role.
Well, if you go back and look at our formation document, that's clearly articulated that we're going to be reaching out to town employees, and in a very polite way, it says you will participate. So I can clearly, make sure I do that with Brian, because that's good protocol to do that. But I was a little bit annoyed that I didn't hear back from everybody that I sent an email to. And then I went back and looked, and it's like, okay, I kind of heard from everybody, and hear from Rich Turcotte, but so I want to establish with all these folks, including the town administrator, when we ask for something, we need to get it in a timely manner, because we don't have time to screw around with this. And whether it's Steve Nims or whoever it is, I'm just not willing to put up with it. We need it now. Figure it out and get us the information in a timely manner. So, you know, if people want to call me an a-hole about that, no problem. I'm good with it. I personally
Been
don't
called
see
that
it as
before.
as an unreasonable expectation. So, hey, what do you think? Are you okay with that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I've known Sarah for a long time. She's a very, very intelligent woman. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, she aced the exam, the building inspector exam, which is almost unheard of. I think it's very, very important that she be included in some of this, especially given that this is the first I hear about Mr. Gardner's new proposal up there on 101 and 119. It really is confusing as to what he wants to do. At one point, he wanted to put a bunch of modular homes in there, but he wanted to use a trailer park format. And I had talked to Roger as soon as I saw that document. I said, in my opinion, I think he's trying to circumnavigate the zoning bylaws for a subdivision and put what he's calling a trailer park, but they're modular homes on foundations. So this isn't the first time that he's proposed something that, how should I put it kindly, that was unordinary or in clear violation of a multitude of zoning bylaws and planning board laws. So I think that Sarah being the enforcement officer now, I think it's very important that she come and sit down to a couple of our meetings here, as Bill said, to get a feel for what it is, what we're doing. I agree with that 100%.
All right, excellent. The other thing I wanted to, and we're going to circle back to the thing that Lorraine sent over, just so we can talk about that a bit. But the other thing I looked at, I have not reached out to anybody at MRPC as I thought I was going to be able to, Monday being a holiday and the rest of the week kind of got away from me. But I did have an opportunity to talk to the town administrator, and I did get a couple of numbers that, again, in my opinion, may preclude me from reaching out to MRPC. So the town was we applied for a couple of what are called community compact grants. And we were awarded those grants the end of last week. So we found out about it on Tuesday. One of them is it's a zoning grant to deal with, one's for a housing bylaw, and the other has to do with land use and economic zoning. The housing bylaw one was, I believe, $12,000. The land use and zoning was $33,000. So somebody else is going to, consultant or outside company is going to work on those and get them back to it. So when I talked to Brian about the suggestion of bringing somebody in to talk about what it may cost to hire a consultant to do some of this work, and the first words out of his mouth was no way, because you're looking north of $100,000 to bring somebody in to do, at least at this point in time. He believes it's way too early in the process. I know, some of us have expressed that same thing, and it may be too early to look at that. So I don't know if you want me to still pursue MRPC to see if we can get some sort of an estimate out of them. The big thing they're going to ask is, well, what exactly do you want us to do?
Exactly.
And I'm
No.
not 100% sure if we can answer that question yet.
No.
That's
Well, I
exactly-
think tonight's a good meeting. I have some comments. The first thing we wanted to talk about, you said about the format of the packages. And the first meeting last week, there was, we want to look at other towns and what they did. We're concerned about what our package looks like in town, presentations, the aesthetics, the word spell, all that stuff. Lorraine, hiring someone like Lorraine could take care of all that. But if it's about the aesthetics and we can look at other packages, and again, Lorraine would even help with that. But if you look at our packages and I compare to Acton and the other towns, if that's what we're going to look at, I would jump right into it. I'm going to do that because, again, we're not going to spend $100,000. We don't have that in town.
Right.
When I look at our two packages that you sent out, and the digital package the same as the hard copy.
I believe I didn't open those Word documents. I believe they are, but I didn't open them.
All right,
It
because
should
I
be.
did pick up the hard copy and went through it. The digital package, I kind of opened it, but it was more pages than the hard copy. So already there's a discrepancy. But let's make believe one of these packages is correct. When I look at if I look at the format, there's a and I look at Acton, the other towns that you looked at, we have a table of contents, text, and when I go through, I don't see it being written any differently than what the others are, other than you've already talked about a couple of the things you might want to throw in for context. But if we want to just look at the format, which I think is important to look at least we have a sort of a benchmark. Yeah, we agree with how it's set up, and then we can feed information into it. I didn't see it being that much different than the other towns that you had presented. And if we could all agree to that, boy, we can get over that hurdle so that in 8 weeks, we kind of focus on, well, okay, what is the information? And I thought part of the feedback coming back was, yeah, last week there's a zoning bylaw and a general bylaw. And if we were to go out and get feedback from our town people who are out there every day fighting and trying to, justify the bylaw against whatever, let's get feedback from them, because there's 300 pages here. Let's find out the 6 things that are happening, or 12 things, whatever those are, and then we can direct those. Again, we've got 8 weeks, and then sort of address those issues, and then go back in. And I don't know if you're really thinking about going through every single bylaw in this format, or assign everybody, hey, you guys take 1 through 20, and Walt and Glenn, you take 20 through 30, whatever, and then sort of break it up that way. But let me back up a little. The feedback that we were expecting, and you were absolutely right, when you don't get feedback from town people, from the town people that we all work together, we really need that feedback in order to move forward. So I think we've got a half a dozen things that Rick Metcalf had mentioned, and then NIMS. I've heard that snow plowing issue, the pushing snow, that's always been they may seem small, but during storms, everything, those are big issues. So, we can go back and look at those. So I think the format looks fine. I think, the few things that we got, you're going to go back out and chase the other people, Bill, basically. You've already said that. You've gone out and said, hey, give me some feedback. If it's really only going to be these less than 10 things, okay, we go after the 10, and then we go through this, we're going to go through the 300 pages. Well, one thing before we start off on that, you mentioned, the process. It is my understanding, I've been on a couple of committees for creating bylaws. Any bylaw that we were passed about, it had to be reviewed by the legal counsel of the town.
Correct.
That's true, right? Before it goes to the state AG. Okay. Because no one on here is a lawyer, and that's always a concern. The only reason I bring that up, because when I look at, our review, the committee, one of the things we're going to do is the purpose of the committee is review, making recommendations to recodify, amend, eliminate, or add to the town of Ashburnham bylaws. Eliminate and add, we really can't do that legally, right? We're going to make we'd have to go to legal. If we're going to change a bylaw, we're going to go before the town, right?
That's right.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
So no, as I interpret that, and again, I always stand to be corrected, but as I interpret it, if you were saying, okay, Bill Johnson, you need to rewrite a land use bylaw, you got a better chance of seeing Jesus, because I have no idea what I'm doing.
Right.
So but what we might have is, and again, we'll just use land use as a general term, maybe there's 3 problems that are identified in land use by whomever, so that what we would say is, these 3 things are a problem, they need to be dealt with. It may not be us dealing with it, but it's to identify what it is, or if we need to add some new bylaws, or if there's something that's very outdated, all we're doing is we're making a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen that we think this is the action that we need to take. And then it may go to somebody else. It may go out to a consultant. We may apply for a grant for it. It's just, in your point about the format, the only thing that I would like to see is, and I know I'm jumping around on us here, but when you I look at the Norwell, the table of contents there, I like the fact that, it's got the town charter in there. The biggest thing that excites me, though, is that in each one of those sections, they've got space reserved. We don't have that in our documents right now. Like on the first one, 13 to 20 are reserved. So that as other bylaws get passed and put in there, there's a place to put them in the document. That's all I'm looking for, is that's the, you can call it a chapter, you can call it a section, you can call it a part. At the end of the day, it really doesn't make much difference what we call it. So I would like us at some point tonight to say, yeah, we're going to do this. And then next week, I think we jump into the deep end of the pool and start going through these things and say, okay, here's, again, it's going to be a collective process of what we all want to do, not what I want to do.
Okay.
No, I would agree. I mean, a lot of towns have, like Acton, have zoning bylaws in one package, general bylaws in another package. Norwell has them all in one package, which I think is the way to go. And they have it divided up by, in this case, town government administration, public health and safety, blah, 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 zoning bylaws, but they also include the rules and regulations that implement the bylaws, which right now are scattered throughout the
All over
website
the place, yeah.
on town. I've been slowly accumulating all of those based on my, review of the website. But it would be great to have, here's this, basically use state language, here's the statute, here's the regulation, here's the statute, here's the regulation that implements the statute,
That's right.
all in one place. I mean, and so I like the idea of consolidating both the zoning and the general bylaws, town charter, whatever, into one document. So when someone comes into town, you say, here it is.
That's it. I agree completely, Bill, too, with the whole charter thing. I mean, when you think about how many people, even select board members in the past, who hadn't even read the charter, they hardly even knew it wasn't existed and weren't really following. It wasn't until last couple of years that the charter and the problem we had with the charter came up. It led to some changes that we saw in this town. Because the charter had been ignored. And the reason it's ignored is because it's forgotten about and it's not in any place that anybody goes and looks at. And that's the basic thing. The only thing I would add to, though, a little bit to what Glenn was saying with regards to adding. Yeah, there are things that from a planning board perspective, that when we're trying to deal with problems, that we know is not a good planning thing, a potential subdivision or a potential, couple common driveway and houses. And our heart of hearts as planning board members, we know it's not a good idea, or it's not a good design, or it's not a good this, but we have no authority under that, where we look at other towns' bylaws that give the planning board more authority to impose some kind of, a clearer structure and a clear design intent and things like that. Now, that isn't the planning board's, obviously that has to be approved by the town, and that needs a lot. The planning board doesn't have the authority to add those things. But in a bylaw review, I think there will be certain kinds of additions to the bylaws that other towns have that we don't, that I think we're going to want to bring to the select board and bring to the town and say, this could help us do our job better and also be in the better interest of the town. Now, that's where there's a nuance there that we have to manage with regards to bylaw improvement and update.
So Bill, given what Walt just said, is it really our primary mission to reformat the existing bylaws as we may agree to consolidate them or not. And then to identify which bylaws need adjustment, elimination, addition, whatever, and indicate why and how they need adjustment. Or do we go a step further and say these words need to change? I mean, those are two different things. And rewriting the bylaws is, I think, getting back to what you said. I mean, we can identify what the issues are. We can reformat everything and put everything together and say, we need to revisit bylaw XYZ for the following reasons. But is it also our mission to rewrite them?
Well, again, I will give you my opinion, Marshall. I don't believe it is.
Good.
Because again, I don't think from a timing perspective, you all
Yep.
have worked on bylaws. It can take months and months and months.
Absolutely.
And to get it right. And I think it's an unreasonable expectation to say, we're going to take all the zoning and general bylaws and we're going to clean them all up in 18 months. No, I don't see that happening. So like we said earlier, though, last week, there may be some, we'll go back to the point that Glenn made about the snow plowing thing. Whatever the bylaw is that says you can't do that, it may be perfectly fine. We just take that and you move it over here into the new table, but we identify it as an enforcement problem that needs to be dealt with, or if it needs to be changed or something like that, maybe the fine, whatever it is, we identify what that is. And as we said, there's going to be a bunch of these that we're just going to click them and move them over here. Give them to Lorraine. She reassigns them, puts them in there. If we change a word, as I understand it, or anything with those bylaws, now you're talking about it's got to go to legal counsel. You have to have a public hearing, and there's, it's got to be a certain number of days and this and that. It's an elongated process. So I don't see how we could do it. If we're,
No, I would agree.
totally right here.
I agree. And, as Walt pointed out with the green business versus business, and, there's a bunch of issues that can be identified and set forth. And I think that's probably, would appear to me to be, anyway, the primary mission of the committee, to identify the problem areas, what's good, what needs to be changed, and, reformat everything so that whenever the time comes and whoever does it, they'll have the information and they won't spend their time on what's good, but spend their time on what needs to be fixed.
Bill, if I could go back to address something that Walt was saying a couple minutes ago about how we can't change a bylaw and what authority the planning board has that has to go by what the bylaw says. If the zoning enforcement officer denies somebody something and they come to the zoning board or the planning board for either a special permit or a variance, one of the things we have to look at for either one of those things, it's clearly stated in the special permit process and the variance process, is what was the intent of the bylaw. And I can't begin to tell you how many times the whole 5-member board has sat there scratching their heads. And what the hell were they thinking when they wrote this? Sometimes it's extremely difficult to figure out what the intent was. So some of those things certainly need to be clarified, and we can try to figure out what they meant when these bylaws went into place.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Dave. Great point.
If we go with what, what everything that we've just stated, 8 weeks is plenty of time to do that, and come up with some recommendations to the selectmen. I think that's doable. you know, to have to go through all that. That's just not what you just, even 18 months to take you a couple of years to do some of this. So
Yeah.
so that's good. That's good that we resolved it. One thing I just heard is what we talked about last week was, you know, maybe one of the things tonight, we just agree that we're going to combine the town charter, special bylaws in general into one document. And I think that, I personally think that's a great idea. Dave, you didn't chime in on that. Are you good with that? The one document?
Yes, oh, definitely. I think that that's a great idea.
All
I
right.
think that's a great idea. Speaking of documents, Bill, going back, I can certainly feel your frustration when you were saying that you couldn't get anywhere in the town hall with finding zoning laws changed or the current documents. It's maybe 3 years ago, it had come to the zoning board's attention that we were working off of a zoning bylaw book that was about 4 years outdated, and none of us knew it. And once I found that out, that we were working out of an outdated zoning bylaw book, it took me 5 months to get the updated copy of it out of the town. And I was, it wasn't for not asking either. I had requested it at least once a week until I got to the point of where I was demanding it. And they started to tell me, this was Heather Berkowitz, that the format that they had was difficult to transfer over into a format where they could print up the new bylaw. I told her that that was ridiculous, that I just couldn't take that for an answer, and that the zoning board of appeals needed, and it was imperative that we have a current bylaw book to go off of. That to be continuing to working out of something that was outdated by 4 years just could not be tolerated. And I couldn't get the new copy out of the town until I threatened to go to the selectmen. But I finally did it. Took me 5 months, but I finally got the updated copy out of it. So I certainly feel your frustration when it comes to trying to get some documents out of the town. I think that that needs to be changed. And I think that when we need something in, especially as important as that, as the zoning board of appeals, having a current zoning book never should have taken nearly half a year to get.
Well, let me pick up on that, Dave, because when I sent over what I'll call the master files, the Word documents over to Lorraine to look at them. So, and I can forward you the emails if you'd like to see them. But basically what she said was, Donna had said that her and Heather had started working on this. So they had done some things in those documents with reformatting. There were some things, specific things that Lorraine had referenced that were going to allow it to function more completely. But again, it's an incomplete document. So the ones, I mean, I've got one sitting right here, you know, general bylaws, town of Ashburnham, a True Test Coffee revised October 29th, 2013. So I don't even have any confidence that the ones that they gave us in the master file, I don't know how current those are. You know, well, we know that there's bylaws missing from it. So, and one of the first things, once we get it reformatted, even if we don't make any changes to it, I think the first thing we need to do, and this is another advantage with Lorraine, we need to print up copies and get them to the people that need to have copies of them. So, you know, again, everybody's dealing with the same database of information about what's going on. So, well, let me ask you this question, picking up on what Glenn said. What if I made a motion that said that we were going to, the committee is recommending that we switch over to a format similar to the town of Norwell? Would anybody be receptive to that?
Absolutely.
All right, so
Yeah.
then I'll make that motion, because what I'm thinking is that, as Glenn said it, at the end of the day, there's not that much difference. Let's pick one and off we go. So
No,
I'll make,
I'd rather have one consolidated.
yeah,
Agreed.
okay. I think everybody agrees with that. So I'll make that motion that we convert ours over to a format similar to the town of Norwell, dated 1/20/2019.
I'll
Okay,
second.
yeah, second the motion. Okay.
All right. Any discussion on that?
Do we need legal counsel to review what we're about to do and to take these
No.
3 documents?
No,
Okay.
I don't believe so because, well, for a couple of things. I didn't personally talk to Deb, but I think Rosemarie did. And one of the things she was recommending was that these are the types of things that we can do now without having any exposure to the town, without having to talk to legal counsel or doing anything else. We're simply making a format change. Now, I think one of the keys is going to be is that as you move things around, and if you renumber them, you may have to reference what the old number was or the old citation was. Or again, that's all that formatting stuff that
Right.
if we do what Lorraine would do, so that, yeah, it's not going to be chapter 9 anymore. It's going to be section 4, whatever. So I think there'll have to be some of that going on with that document. But I mean, if you'd like me to, I can shoot her an email and check on it, but I think we're good.
Yeah, only because
I
there's
would
a-
agree. I mean, the substance isn't changing. It's just numbers.
But Marshall, there could be a court case from 5 years ago that referenced the bylaws, so we have to watch out if we're going to renumber. That's all.
No,
So-
I agree. And I think as Bill said, as long as you back reference.
Okay.
All right, so if nobody else has any comments on that, then I'll call a roll call vote, please. Bill Johnson, yes.
Marshall
Dave?
Dennis, yes.
Oh, Marshall, okay, good.
Paul Meisner, yes.
Glenn Hathaway, yes.
Dave Perry, yes.
Okay, great. Hey, we got something accomplished.
I just want to back up just to make sure I've got the notes because, the conversation about the things that we do. So step 1 was collect everything into one document. Step 2 was reformat and consolidate to the degree that we can. Step 3 was, which is a bigger step, which is identify the issues, which will require us to really go through the document and identify the issues. Step 4 is correct discrepancies and inconsistencies. Now that part will require some proposed rewrites or changes to the bylaws in order to correct it. I can think of one, for example, there's a clause in there in the green business bylaw that I'm going to recommend deleting because it's causing the problem and we have to delete it. Now that's maybe a fairly simple one to do, but there would be some rewrites and then the step 5 is then make a recommendation of what bylaws need further review and update, which means, well, these are the ones that we think there's the opportunity to make meaningful changes to and corrections to. But that is sort of the next zone of what this committee or some other committee ends up working on and doing. Does that make sense?
I would just, I guess, stop short of, we can make recommendations about what might be deleted or added, but I don't think this committee wants to actually rewrite them.
Oh, no, we can't
Yeah,
do that.
okay.
But we have to say,
Here's what should be done.
and here's what should be done. And in some cases, there'll be pretty clear sort of suggested edits that will solve the problem.
Yep.
And that's what I don't want us to, I want to sort of push us towards making meaningful changes to the bylaws where they need to be made.
No, agreed.
So if you go back to the comment that Glenn made about the 8 weeks and getting some things done by then. So when you look at that timeline is going to preclude us from really making any substantial changes to any bylaws, because with the requirements for public hearings and things like that, there's no way in that timeline that you're ever going to be able to pull that off. So
I was looking at the charter that you gave for our charge for the bylaw.
Right.
That's much more than May 1st. That's into next year.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
This is just to kick it off and be able to then focus attention in certain areas that would need change and then have to go through that whole, it has to eventually get back to the planning board who has to run hearings on that. And that's why I'm bringing it up. That's not something we're going to do. That has to happen
Right. So I'm thinking
That's where we'll
that,
get some expert help too. Not only will we be able to look at bylaws in other towns and say, hey, this bylaw would work better for us than the one we have. But, then you have to get expert help in what's involved in that. That's where the
Mhm.
rewriting happens. And maybe that's where we then can hire an expert or a consultant who can come in and saying, okay, these are the 3, 4 bylaws that we feel there are issues with, and here's why we think there are issues. Help us get to an improved bylaw.
yeah, remember now, there's also a bunch of bylaw work that's being done, while this is going on. So there's some things like that that'll have to be integrated. But I'm looking at the 8 weeks of us being, it doesn't mean we have to go to town meeting to something.
Mhm.
We need to
Right.
be able to report back to the Board of Selectmen.
Yep.
Here's our progress to date. Here's what's happened. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're working on. I get the distinct impression that that's what they're looking for, just
Yeah.
to be able to demonstrate that we are moving forward. Hi,
Right.
Gary, how you doing? Maybe he's muted.
Not now.
There he is.
Doing just fine, yeah. Thank you.
Uh,
Just sneaking
All
in.
right, maybe we, if, a couple things, if we can just get back to Lorraine's, well,
Yes,
the time is moving forward. She basically put forth 3 options. I don't understand the per page business. Makes no sense to me, but you have the hourly billing rate, whatever that is, and then the retainer for the next foreseeable future. I don't know where the 285 per week came from, but I don't know. Is there any discussion here? Hi, Lorraine.
Hi, I'm here in case you want me to explain.
I'm not talking behind your back.
go ahead, Lorraine.
Okay, well, the per page was really, the basis started on prevailing charges for that, for a page of design. I wouldn't recommend that option. I just put it out there to give you options, but I think that would be the most expensive avenue for you to take. Because I would basically have to count the number of pages in the document and charge you whether or not I worked on them or not. And there are
Right,
many pages
right.
I won't have to work on.
Yep.
So, but I put it out there. And as far as the 285 goes, that's what I feel is fair for me to be here, available to you at any time to perform the edits or amendments or additions, subtractions, anything you want me to do, any ancillary services associated with this. You would be the first client, you'd be the first customer I would work on that day. I would prioritize your needs for that. And you wouldn't have to start right away. So say you wanted to get rolling a little bit so that I wasn't doing nothing in the beginning, but wait until you start becoming active. And in which case, it would be conversations, phone calls, emails, and actual work on the document itself that you would pay me regardless of how many hours I put in that week. So I think that's the best option for you. It gives you the greatest amount of accessibility to me. And it gives you a wider range of ancillary services. And you can set that, so when you're going for the budget, you can budget how many weeks, and that's how much it will cost for that many weeks of work, and it won't go over.
And what if we give you nothing to do during a week?
We still pay her.
You still pay me because the next week you might give me twice as much to do. That's why I would recommend you kind of get rolling a little bit, buffer up some work, and then I would get started that way. But you won't go over budget.
Given that the Board of Selectmen wants us to do something by May 1st, would it make sense to, if you're going to go that route, to limit the number of weeks that happens?
Well, yeah, that's part of the discussion. So if you just, the math that Lorraine laid out there. So if we're supposed to be doing this for 18 months, that's 72 weeks. At that $285 bucks a week, that's $20,520 over the course of 3 fiscal years. So that's not an ugly number for me. And I think there'll be some weeks when there won't be much going on, and there'll be other weeks where there'll be 3 times as much stuff going on. And this, I look at this as a way to stabilize it, level it out. It's like income averaging. You average it out over the period of time. It's a fixed number, as she said, so you're not gonna, you don't have a budget exposure where it's gonna be overexpended by X amount of dollars, because we don't know how big the document's gonna be, and we
Right.
don't know how much time it's gonna take, and there's a lot of things we just don't know yet.
Right.
Does, I couldn't have said it better. The 285 does include any kind of printing or anything like that, does it?
It does not include printing, but it includes going to meetings if I need to attend a meeting. It's conversations, because someone's going to have to relay the information to me on the phone, through email. So there'll be some back and forth communication. Then I'll have to do the actual work of the edits. Or if there's some research, you want me to look for something, it's everything but the printing. But I
Okay,
don't think
so-
it's going to do much printing.
All right, so
Yeah, digital copy.
basically the 285 is like 4 hours of your time.
It's whatever
but
needs
I
to
mean,
be
based on
accomplished that week.
based on an hourly rate, is that right?
Of 65 an hour?
Yeah.
Right. And I might put in 10 hours or 2 hours, but
Okay,
it
understood.
was just the number that I thought was a fair number for you to reserve my
Yeah.
my attention, my priority.
All right, I'm with Bill. I have no problem with that.
Anybody else? Now,
I don't
remember,
have a
just from a procedural thing, I'm gonna have to take this to the town administrator, and, he's got to look it over and do this and do that. But I do want to have a clear direction from the committee about what we'd like to do.
And the plan is to, as you say, to lock this in for 72 weeks or whatever the number
Well,
is.
Well, yeah, until your project is done. If it only takes 65 weeks and you say, look, I think we're there, well, then it ends.
So it's so
After
much
that-
per week with an upset limit.
And then once it's done and it's approved, if you come back in 6 months and you want edits, then I'll charge on an hourly rate, because it'll be minor changes.
In
It'll be
that case,
easy.
maybe you just pick 20 grand and be done with it. As Walt says, and as an upset limit. Over the course of, maybe you pick the town meeting of, 2023 or whatever the number,
Yeah, one of the things that, and I can't speak to this specifically, but from a general perspective, one of the things we need to be cognizant of too is that we don't want to get ourselves in a position where we have to go out to bid on something.
Right,
So
right.
there with the, Chapter 30B, the procurement regulations,
Yeah.
there's this, that, and the other thing. So
Yeah, and
that's
I
where,
know you have to get a bid if it's over $10,000.
right.
So
So
we just do it in pieces.
yeah, and again, depending on how you establish these things, like, we don't go out to bid on our town council, for example, and there's $20,000 a year or so budgeted for that. So I'm sure there's a way to do this, but it's just another thing we need to be cognizant of. That's all.
You could do it in phases. You could say phase 1 is to May 1st. So phase
Right.
1 is to May
That's-
1st. Phase 2 would be sort of the next, what
Well,
happens after May 1st and so
You
forth.
could,
And then
yes,
and
but
just
we
take it.
probably we'd want to keep it in fiscal years.
Right,
So,
right.
so it would be between now and, June 30th.
June 30th, right.
Yeah.
And then, then you go into 22, and then if you're into 23. So there's a natural way to break it up like that if we need to, or,
Well, then make it, maybe you make it through the end of, June 30th of 23.
well, I don't know if again, I don't know if we need to commit to a particular period of time,
Okay.
because we would commit to when the project terminates. So I would say that when this committee goes away,
Mhm.
the arrangement would go away.
Okay,
And it's all going to be, I think, about the way we budget for it. So
okay,
you could maybe in the budget, instead of saying something specific for bylaw review, we put a line in there for Board of Selectmen, whatever, XYZ, and we put $10,000 in there.
okay.
So again, Brian can sort that out for us as to how we want to do it. But, again, look, I think it's a fair number. When you look at what the potential is, and some weeks are going to be heavy, some weeks are going to be light.
Yeah, yeah.
And, based on the amount of money that I see on some of these grants that we're doing, the one for $33,000, I mean, that's probably like 2 or 3 bylaws. So the number works for me.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So do you need a motion,
Um,
which is essentially to say that committees will express the Prince being engaged to do this work, and that you, Bill Johnson, will talk to them?
No, again, I think I want to hold off on a motion for tonight.
Okay.
Let me talk to Brian. It won't be till Monday because he's not around tomorrow. But let me find out what the best way to do this is. And then I'll put
Okay.
that on the agenda for next week, and it'll all be cleaned up, and this is how we should do it and what should happen. And then we'll make a determination of what the start date's going to be.
Sounds good.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
Rain, thank you.
Good choice. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've agreed on a budget format. We've talked about hiring Lorraine to do that, and Gary. So anybody have anything else they want to talk about that I missed so far?
I just have one question on the timeline. Is it recommended or legally by the state, do we have to review the bylaws every 5 years? And I'm not sure was that something we said last week? So where does that stand?
I believe that there's a requirement by the state that it has to be done periodically. I think it's 5 years. I can get a specific answer to that question. I didn't write that down as something you wanted a specific on, but I'll get that.
And the reason I ask is that, if it's just a review, we might, and what's the timeline? If you're, wait, we got to get this done by July. I'm just curious because in 8 weeks, we'll kind of walk through this and review the document. We talked about, so we might meet that. Just bringing that up. So is it a must? Is it legally we supposed to do it? And if so, is there a date this year or something?
Well, I will get the answer to that, but what we're probably going to find is that it's another one. If it's not specifically a legal requirement, I would hazard a guess it's certainly a best practice that they should be reviewed on a regular basis. But I'll get clarification on that. And I don't think there's a lot of things that we're supposed to be doing, that, we're supposed to have dam mitigation things on file. We're only 4 years behind on that. So, there's a bunch of stuff like that that's in the wind, if you will. But I think this will establish, here's a new baseline for where we are, and going forward, maybe that becomes a bylaw if it's not already, that
Yep.
the town will review its bylaws at least every 5 years or whatever it is.
Okay.
So that's a possibility, but I'll see if I can get a specific answer on that.
All right. The only other thing I have, we have a digital copy now of the bylaws and a hard copy. I know for me, I was going to take the digital copy and start going through it, but we just found out tonight we may not have all the bylaws. So before I personally go into the digital copy that I have. Is there any way we kind of went over it by next week and figure, oh yeah, there's 10 bylaws missing, or is that part of Lorraine's role that she'll have to go in and find that out?
No, I don't think that's going to be Lorraine's role. Again, in my opinion, I think you can go ahead and start that process, because I think the only way we're going to figure that out is by, going and meeting with people and talking to them and say, oh, like the planning board, how many bylaws have you done, in the last 2 or 3 years, and then looking to see if they're in there. Like I told you, I don't think the sign bylaw's in there. So I know economic development did that with the planning board. So maybe there's 3, maybe there's 10. I don't know if there's a lot, but I don't think that should preclude us from starting the work of going through those documents to do that. Because as I found out, there isn't one person that has the answers to these.
Okay, that's all I had.
Well, it's easy enough to go through, like, let's say the last 15 years of annual reports and look at, which I have copies of, and,
Did we
see
vote on
if,
anything? Yeah.
see if anything that was passed as a warrant article is now included.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
I mean, that's easy enough to do.
Okay. All right, good idea. Anybody else have anything that, we're still gonna talk about what we're gonna do next week. So we are gonna do that, but does anybody have anything else they want to throw out there tonight?
The only other thing is, do we want to address the minutes of the last meeting?
Yeah, I have that up next.
Okay, sorry.
Bill, before we do that, Bill, there was one thing I wanted to ask you. There's a couple of specific bylaws that I know of that are extremely difficult to implement. Do you want me to start working on some of my suggestions for that just yet, or would that be a little bit premature?
No, the sooner you start, the better, Dave, because I think it's kind of one of those things. We're just going to start accumulating information, and as we, we're going to talk about it, but as we figure out what we're going to start and how we're going to work through it, I don't think we want to be jumping around. I think we want to keep it in the, whatever order we're going to keep it in. So it would just be, you doing the work in advance. That's all. And I think somebody talked about it earlier. I don't want to spend hours on these Zoom meetings, reading bylaws. That's stuff that we're going to have to do on our own away from this, and then come back with suggestions or whatever, however we want to work it out. But I know we're over tonight, but I'd like to keep these things to around an hour, kind of get in, say what we have to say and get the hell out, and then go do our work and come back the next week and, go at it that way.
It seems
I will start working on some of the things that I think I need to be tweaked from the zoning board point of view. And if we got time next week, I'll start to go over them. If not, I'll just keep my notes on file, and when the time is right, I'll start to bring them up.
Hey, one of the things I'd suggest you is that if it's a particular bylaw, shoot us an email and let us just say to us that, look, this is one that I think that we need to do some stuff so that we could look at it, we could read it, we could be prepared. And then when we get to that and we start talking about it, we'll all be on the same page.
Excellent idea, Bill. Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that all of us should basically be doing what Dave is doing, with the bylaws, going through and methodically going through where we see issues or where we've had issues in the past. But then as a group, perhaps next week, we can talk about dividing up the conversations week to week between now and May 1st. That, for example, the week after next, we start on the general bylaws and we all do our homework and we all, focus on general bylaw this through that. And that ends up being our conversation the following week. And then the week after that, we take the next group, because 2 things are then happening. One, we're each going through and we're targeting the things that are particular interest to us that we see are problems. And I have, for example, Roger Hoyt is going through and he's been sending me little emails about this conflict or that conflict. And, it's up to me to kind of collect those. But then I think we all do that. But then in order to make sure we're comprehensive in our final output, we then methodically, dedicate each meeting to a certain section of the bylaws that we've all read through and we can all have comment. And many of them might be, I think this is perfectly fine. It's not an issue.
Right.
But then there'll be problems where this is going to be a deeper problem. And, there's going to have to be some follow-up after we get done with our business on it, because we're seeing a deeper problem. And then we can really highlight those areas that in the future we might need to bring some expertise in to really work on.
I think that's a great idea. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I agree.
So what do you want to do for what do you want it to be our task for next week? You want to start going through a section of the general bylaws and doing what Walt had suggested, or do we want to do something else?
Or
What are your
propose
thoughts?
just how each of us look through all of them and get a general idea of how we think it should be organized for the 10 weeks after that, and then each of us sort of saying here, here's how we could segment these out.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea. Why don't we, given our vote tonight, see how we might consolidate it, what the format, what the table of contents looks like.
Mhm.
And then
Okay.
once we get that in shape, then we can begin to go through.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the other things we should do too is see if Lorraine is going to be getting on board with us on doing her share of that work for the money that might be budgeted in for that. Maybe we could get an answer from Brian on that by next week.
Oh, yeah, no, I'll have an answer. That's a given. I'll talk to him on Monday and go in and probably meet with him and go over it. And I like the idea of discussing the table of contents because, we have the general headers, and obviously we're going to have different bylaws and things, but we could talk about that format. If we could nail that down, then we could pass that off to Lorraine and say, here you go. And she can start setting it up and doing the formatting and things like that. Okay, that works. I'll put that in as a review of the table of contents for next week. So go through both general and zoning and start looking at it
Yeah.
and see what you think table of contents should look like.
Yeah, good idea. Once we
All
get
right.
that, then we can begin to go through individually.
All right, excellent.
Good.
All right, so Marshall had sent out a draft copy of the minutes, which I was late in getting to people, and or did you send it to everybody, Marshall?
I did.
Okay, so did anybody have a chance to look at that? And if so, I'd entertain a motion to approve those. If not, we can put it off till next week.
I'm fine with them. I looked at them. I'll make the motion to approve those as the minutes.
I looked at them as well. I'll second the motion to approve it.
All right, moved and seconded. Any discussions on the minutes? Hearing none. Let's do a roll call vote. So the motion is to approve the meeting minutes of February 11th, 2021 for the Bylaw Review Committee. Bill Johnson, yes.
Walt
Dave
Meisner,
Perry,
yes.
yes.
Glenn Hathaway, yes.
Walt Meisner, yes.
Marshall Dennis, yes.
All right, excellent. And the next meeting will be next Thursday, the 25th at 6 p.m. We'll get that booked and get that out to you, and we'll get an agenda with that. And sorry for going long tonight, but I think it was a good discussion. I think we made some progress.
Indeed.
I do too. I think it was a very productive meeting. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, folks. Have a good night. Lorraine, thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night, all.
Take care.
Have a
Yep.
good weekend.
But
Good evening.